All right, it is just after 7. We're going to get things rolling. I want to thank everybody for coming here again. I know it feels like we were just at a meeting about Lower Village. We were. So I want to just kind of explain. First, I'd like to introduce myself and who we're with tonight. So my name is Jesse Stedman. I'm the town planner here in Stow. And I'm joined here tonight with Tom Bigelow of Green International Affiliates and Susan Carter of Places Associates. Green represents our new designer on the project, and Susan Carter and Places Associates has provided some consulting engineering work to the town for a long time and has been helping us kind of assess some of the technical alternatives as we move forward here. So the purpose of tonight is really just to give a brief overview, some may have heard it now, but of why the Lower Village project remains unfinished. And how the new design firm Green International is proposing to resolve some of the technical design issues that we encountered on the project. And then lastly, how we plan to keep this project on track to completion throughout this construction season. So what I'll do is I'm just going to go over just kind of a brief story about kind of how we got to this point. I'll hand it over to Green. We'll talk about some of the technical aspects. One of the reasons we're here again is because we now have a report from Green that really helps us identify and define what it was that were some of the core issues that were so difficult to resolve last fall and why we had to wait until this construction season to restart the project and finish it. So to be frank, when it comes to how we got here, we basically hired a design firm that we thought had all the credentials necessary to get the project done and meet the required standards that we asked for in our proposals. And we've hired Green to help us kind of look through those plans and what we have, and we feel confident now that that we do have a firm that can get us those required standards and that can get us to the finish line on this project. So I want to explain a little bit about how we worked with our first designer to help us do that. I also want to say that the town is already working with town council to potentially recoup some of the losses that we have incurred, and I'll leave it at that, but that is off on a different process. So our focus right now is and has remained getting the project done, not just getting it done, but getting it done right, and trying to maintain the intent of the original project that everyone agreed to and came together on in May of 2017 when we originally approved the funding for it. So I'm going to start just quickly from 2013. That is the time that we determined to take the goals of traffic safety, pedestrian safety, and upgrades to the drainage and actually go out and find a company that could take those goals, put it into buildable format. It was at that time, around 2013, 2014, that we put out a request for proposals. We worked with our consulting engineer and different folks in town that had experience to put that request for proposals together. I think we saw about a dozen proposals, responses. We checked references, we held interviews. We went through all the typical processes you do in 30B. We eventually found a designer that seemed to have the best credentials, had worked on similar projects, successfully completed them. We scored, analyzed, did everything that you typically do, and we hired who we thought would be the best designer to get the project done. So we had a team, the superintendent of streets, myself, some various folks from in the town departments to help us with that process. After we had a designer on board, of course, a lot of folks here remember going to some of these original design meetings. We had some forums. We went through some of the concept designs. We tweaked them a bit. We heard different feedback. We worked with abutters as we got up to that point of having 100% design plans. It was right around that time that we had been making multiple requests of MassWorks to try to get a big chunk of that funding for the construction of the project taken care of by the state. So it was in 2016, I think it was on Halloween of 2016, we went to the State House, we accepted the $850,000 grant, and that was really what kicked us off. So we had a designer, we had plans that were close to 100%, we had the grant funding, and that's how we kind of took off to the races, and we eventually made it to May of 2017 at town meeting, which was the time when we allocated the additional funds to kind of to get us from the delta of what we got from the state to what we estimated would be required to complete the project. So regarding the construction of the project itself, that began, it was the spring of 2018 that we really got going. And you know, what we didn't know when we obviously started here and when we hired our original designer was that halfway through that project we would start noticing that there were some technical issues that were difficult to resolve. We worked with that designer on a few occasions, multiple occasions, to try to resolve the issues themselves. When we got towards the fall, we realized that either the issues that had arisen were too complex or that they were simply not able to be figured out prior to the close of asphalt plants and the end of that construction season. It was basically at that time that we worked with everybody from the town administrator to folks in town that had engineering backgrounds to Places Associates to kind of help us understand, you know, what's the best course of action here. We kind of all huddled. It was at that point that we realized that the best thing to do, and what we believe the best thing to do, was to winterize the project, spend the winter understanding what exactly had gone wrong and what kind of technical deficiencies we were up against, get a designer on board that could help us resolve it and take us to the finish line. And so that's what this winter was. That's why Green is here tonight. They have been able to complete the report since that time. And so we have a much clearer picture now of some of the design issues that we were encountering at the time and couldn't necessarily put a finger on because we didn't have that expertise available to us at the moment. But also some other things that we do know now we want to take care of to get this project done. The last thing I'll say, you know, as we move through there, it's important to note that we, as part of our construction team, as part of the whole project team, we had also hired that same designer to be our construction oversight and our construction administrator. So that was a part of the picture. We have worked with Green now, and our goal going through this next project in this next construction season is for Green to step into that former role as construction oversight, project administration, kind of a typical role for, you know, engineers who have designed a project. But, you know, as kind of belts and suspenders approach, we're also working with Places Associates, Sue Carter and some of her associates, to help the town understand kind of the technical aspects of what we're looking at as we move through construction. We recognize that that is an important role as well. So just a little bit about how we're planning to approach this next season. So that's all I'm going to say for now. I really want to hand it over to Green and let Tom discuss some of the technical issues that they've uncovered and what some of the options are for the path forward. So, thank you.
Thank you, Jesse. Again, my name's Tom Bigelow. I'm from Green International, the new design engineer on the project. Thank you all for coming tonight. Just get started with kind of a project update and what our role has been thus far in the project. We were hired by the town in March of this year to start working on this project and really review the existing conditions and what's out there now as a result of the improvements that were constructed last summer and last fall. And really identify issues that had been previously identified by the town. We've also reviewed the project to identify a few additional issues that we found with what we see out there today on the ground. We also were asked to identify alternatives and different ways that we could go about fixing some of those design issues that had previously been identified by the town and also by us through our review of the project. You may have seen our surveyors out there in late March, early April. We got some additional topographic survey to really pick up all the different improvements that had already been constructed. We blended that in with some of the existing base mapping. We also utilized a survey that had been conducted, an as-built survey conducted by the contractor for the roadway surface, and utilized all that survey information as a part of our analysis of the existing condition out there now, and also in our development of the alternatives moving forward for this project. Since that time, we looked at the project from end to end, and we were able to provide draft recommendations to the town earlier this month on the best steps forward for this project. So some major issues that had been identified with the project, first and foremost, the ponding on the roadway. It had been noted that because of some of the roadway cross slopes and profile slopes and locations of the catch basins, not all the water that was getting to the roadway was really getting into the closed drainage system that had been installed into the catch basins. Also, potential ADA issues. We have constructed new sidewalks along both sides of Great Road, and there are some potential ADA issues with those sidewalks. Turning movements at White Pond Roadway is another, White Pond Road is another concern. Larger vehicles, as they're trying to especially take that right turn from Great Road onto White Pond Road, has been identified as a concern. And also various grading and drainage issues on the abutting properties, particularly on the south side, were also identified as some issues that had been identified. So before I get into some of our analysis and the alternatives that we proposed, I just want to go over a brief overview of some of the design criteria that we used in our evaluations and what we would use on a typical project of this nature. First, the first standard that we would use in Massachusetts is the Mass DOT Project Development Design Guide. That is a standard that talks about all sorts of different aspects of roadway design that Mass DOT uses on all of their projects, and we use on a typical project like this for a municipality ourselves. A lot of what is in the Mass DOT Design Guide is also informed by what is called the AASHTO Green Book, which is a policy on the geometric design of roadways. AASHTO is a national organization that also develops policy for other aspects of roadway design as well that would be applicable to this project. MUTCD controls traffic control devices, so your signs, pavement markings, traffic signals, not that there's one on this project, but all those traffic control devices is governed by what's in MUTCD. That's a national standard. Also, the ADA regulations and Massachusetts Architectural Access Board regulations for handicap accessibility and people with disabilities, accessibility for all those, for everyone really. And also, just one kind of aspect that plays into a lot of our recommendations, our analysis, is Great Road is considered an arterial roadway. If you look at kind of the overall transportation system, you start at your local roads, which is your smallest roads, and you work all the way up to through collectors, arterials, and then interstates and freeways is your biggest classification. So an arterial roadway is considered a major component of the transportation system and the traffic circulation system for the area. So the first issue that we really looked at was the roadway drainage, and we looked at the as-built condition. And what we found was that there are a lot of flat cross slopes, so that's from the center of the road down to the gutter line, so that's your cross slope. And we found a lot of cross slopes that are at close to flat or very flat below standard. We would typically want to see a 2% cross slope. We've identified as a minimum for this project as a 1% cross slope. And we've also found some very flat profile grades or running slope along the roadway. And typically what we would see is at least a 0.5% is what we would design to. And again, we're seeing some areas where the profile slope is less than a 0.5%, downwards of 0.3 to 0.4%. That's contributing to a lot of the ponding on the roadway that we're seeing and the water not running and getting to the catch basins that are out there today. What we did was an inlet analysis, and when we do an inlet analysis, we determine what's considered the roadway spread, and that is how far during a storm event the water will pond at the gutter line and take up part of the roadway. And what we found is that the spread is about 10 feet during the 10-year storm, and that is the design standard that we would design to, the 10-year storm. And the maximum allowed for an arterial roadway is 8 feet. And in addition to that, at the low points of the roadway, so near the abandoned gas station and near Citizens Bank, that is a low point in the roadway. Those low points you would design for a 50-year storm per Mass DOT standards. And again, in the 50-year storm, we're seeing spreads at that low point that basically would go all the way across the roadway. So that is certainly not to Mass DOT standards. So to fix the kind of the ponding and sort of the main issue that we were asked to look at and evaluate for this project, we looked at 3 different options. One would be full depth reconstruction, which would mean removing all the pavement and basically reconstructing the road from the where the post office is, all the way down to White Pond Road. There's obviously some construction costs associated with that, but what that would do is allow us to get the proper profile grade of the roadway, minimum of 0.5% throughout the project limits, and also allow us to get a 2% cross slope, which is the desired cross slope, and help with those spreads that I was just talking about. Oops, getting a little ahead of myself here. The second option that we looked at was a variable mill and overlay, which would basically mill part of the roadway and also install a pavement overlay and work with a lot of the existing pavement that we have there today and be able to obtain cross slopes of at least 1% and a minimum profile slope of 0.5%. The third alternative we looked at was basically just adding more inlets and more catch basins in order to capture that stormwater and get it off the roadway and into the closed drainage system. So what our recommendation to the town has been is a combination of those last two alternatives, which is to do a variable mill and overlay between the post office and White Pond Road. That'll get you the desired cross slopes for the roadway and the desired profile grade, and also add 9 additional drainage structures between the post office and White Pond Road. 2 of those drainage structures would go at the low point, and those are what we call flanking catch basins. Those do 2 things. They help us obtain those spreads, those desired spreads less than 8 feet at the low point during that 50-year storm. They also act as backups. This is a typical thing that Mass DOT will do on all their projects. If the low points were to ever get clogged, those catch basins were ever get clogged, these are just upstream of the low point, and they act as basically a backup overflow for those low points, so to help reduce any risk there if those low points were to clog. Based on our analysis, this will reduce the spreads to the allowable per Mass DOT regulations, which is under 8 feet during the 10-year storm, and also get that desired spread at the low point during the 50-year storm. Another benefit to this is we can utilize a lot of the existing curb and keep a lot of the existing sidewalk that has already been installed, and not have to rip that up, which is something that would have to be done if we did a full depth reconstruction of the roadway. Something else that we also looked at was the closed drainage system and the capacity of that. What was installed last summer was a mixture of 12 and 15-inch reinforced concrete pipes, and that drainage system outlets at the low point. As you head east towards Maynard, there's a low point in the roadway about 800 feet of the project limits, and that's where that existing drainage system outlets. There was also a new subsurface drainage system, infiltration system, that was installed below the Stow Lower Common. And the drainage system connects to a manhole that is just east of White Pond Road. We analyzed that drainage system to determine during a high storm event whether or not the system has enough capacity. And the standard that we would look at for an arterial roadway is to the 10-year storm. What we found in our analysis is that the system is only built to convey the 2-year storm. Just under the 2-year storm, or just about conveys the 2-year storm is the best way to put that, and it would not convey the 10-year storm. So we evaluated 2 options to help mitigate that. The first option would just be to replace what had been installed, basically from the common all the way down to the low point. That's about 1,800 feet of pipe, and replace what had been installed, which was 15-inch pipe, and replace that with 18 and 24-inch pipe to get enough capacity in the drainage system. The other alternative we looked at was expanding that infiltration system that was installed in the lower common last summer, and to provide storage in that system that would help accommodate the 10-year storm. And what we found is both are technically feasible, both are options that could help solve the issue. The expansion of the infiltration system is something we estimate to be cheaper than the upgrading of the drainage trunk line to provide that capacity. There's also some additional environmental permitting that would go along with the upgrading of the drainage system. So our recommendation, what the town is looking to do, is expand that existing infiltration system.
The end?
Yeah, that'll probably be preferred if hold any questions at the end.
Okay.
There will be an opportunity to ask questions.
I could use some further explanation of what an infiltration system is.
Sure, I can answer that now, just while you've asked the question. Infiltration system takes stormwater, and instead of discharging it to a water body or some sort of outfall, it infiltrates it down into the ground and recharges it back into the ground. A third issue that was identified was White Pond Road and the turning movements for large vehicles at White Pond Road. White Pond is a local road classified by Mass DOT. It used to be what I'll describe as a Y intersection. You can go left or right, and there was an island in the middle. And it was reconstructed as a part of the project to be a T intersection, which is a traditional intersection, what we would typically try to design to today. There's some benefits for that for pedestrians. It creates a shorter crossing. It also lowers vehicle speeds at the intersection itself. After the intersection was constructed, there were reports of larger trucks, especially having a difficulty making the right-hand turn from Great Road onto White Pond Road. And what we found in our analysis is that there's basically, White Pond Road is 24 feet wide, and based off the geometry that was designed, there was a pinch point which constricted the road down to 21 feet. That is what we feel is the real issue with some of the larger truck turning movements that you're seeing out there. The design standards, Mass DOT has actually some very good guidance, better guidance than a lot of the other states on truck turning movements and what sort of accommodations you would provide for certain size vehicles. And what we'll call encroachment, which an encroachment is when a vehicle needs to take another lane, whether it's a lane in their same direction or a lane in an opposing direction of travel in order to complete a turn. And what they have different levels of accommodation for an SU-40 vehicle, which is a single unit truck. Think of your typical Jordan's Furniture delivery truck, school buses, fire trucks, and a WB-50, which is a larger tractor trailer articulating truck. So we evaluated two options there. One is a small geometry modification to get rid of that constriction in the curb line and to eliminate encroachment for the SU-40, the school buses, and also the fire trucks. This would meet Mass DOT standards for this intersection being an arterial intersecting with a local road. We also did look at an alternative which would create a wider roadway geometry, intersection geometry, which would also accommodate a WB-50 without any encroachment. That does have some additional impacts to the abutters. It would also exceed the typical design standards for this intersection. We looked at all ways the vehicles would take rights and lefts in from all different directions. We mainly look at the right turns because those are the hardest ones for the larger vehicles to take. We mainly looked at the right turn from Great Road onto White Pond. We also looked at the turn from White Pond onto Great Road. We determined that there was no real feasible option to fully accommodate the right turns from White Pond onto Great Road without some really additional impacts to the abutters on that side. Also, we compared it to the pre-construction condition, and what's out there today is really no worse than what it was prior to construction. So what our recommendation is to the town is to make the small geometry modification, which will accommodate the SU-40s, the fire trucks, and the school buses. That will be without any encroachment into any of the oncoming lanes. A WB-50 would have to encroach into the White Pond Road right at the intersection. This would meet Mass DOT standards. With a arterial meaning a local road, you don't expect a WB-50 to be going through that intersection all that often, and there is a certain level of guidance on that, and that is an acceptable level of service for those larger vehicles. This also helps balance the need to accommodate larger vehicles with also some of the other goals of the project, which is pedestrian and bicycle safety, and also with the Assabet River Trail, I believe recently being constructed just down White Pond Road and down connections on Great Road, and also promoting some of those lower vehicular speeds at the intersection itself. One of the last real larger issue that we looked at was some of the issues with the abutting properties. What we're seeing there in the as-built condition is a steep slope from the sidewalk down into some of the abutting properties or up into the abutting properties, and in particular over where the Stow Cafe and next to the former Beef and Ale, some of those steeper slopes from the sidewalk down into the parking lot. Some of the driveways are steeper than they used to be. We're also seeing some evidence of ponding at the back of sidewalk because the sidewalk is, especially on the south side of the roadway, is higher than the surrounding parking lots. We're seeing some ponding issues there and some grading issues there. Also, in that same location by the Stow Cafe and the Beef and Ale, because of how some of the improvements are out there right now, some of the parking stalls in that parking lot have been shortened, and some of the driveways were reduced to provide access management, which is something that was part of the project and is still a typical thing that you want to do, which is manage the access and manage the size of these driveways to help with define the area that a car would enter a parking lot versus where a pedestrian is on the sidewalk. But that is why some of these driveways were reduced, and some of the driveways were experiencing some issues with some of the larger turning vehicles as well, in addition to White Pond Road. There are some standards that govern this, not as much as the roadway geometrics, but Mass DOT has some guidance on these aspects, and also the Urban Land Institute also has some guidance on how to treat some of these conditions. So we evaluated each of the abutting properties along the project. We looked at grading issues, we looked at drainage issues. In conjunction with our recommendation to the town for the overlay on the roadway itself, we've looked at how that will work with potential grading on the abutting properties. And coming up with a design that will have appropriate grades on the driveway, while also allowing all the driveways to pitch to drain, whether it be to the roadway or back onto the property where it goes to an existing catch basin or sheets off the parking lot, and basically to not create any drainage issues on private property. We are also looking to provide, in certain locations, a grass buffer between the back of the sidewalk and some of those properties, especially where there's a parking lot right up against the sidewalk. We're also looking at how the sidewalk elevations that are in some locations a foot to a foot and maybe not quite a foot and a half higher than the parking lots, and also the roadway and the curb, how to get those to be constructed to meet ADA compliance. So some of those sidewalks that were out there do need to be reconstructed and removed so that the entire project can meet ADA regulations. We've also looked at those parking lots and the striping to make sure that what they had before, say if it was an 18-foot parking stall, is an 18-foot parking stall when the improvements are completed, and also making sure that they still have enough drive aisle width to allow for two-way operations within the parking lot. One recommendation that we are making in select locations, one part of the project was to have a grass strip between the curb line and the sidewalk. Wherever possible, we want to maintain that. It provides a buffer between the pedestrians and the drivers, and that is both a safety and a lot of times a pedestrian comfort issue, something that we tried to design for. There are a few locations due to some of the impacts to the abutters that we're finding that we are recommending that grass strip be eliminated, but again, there would be a grass strip at the back of sidewalk at those very locations between the sidewalk and the parking lots, so that way it's not one basically sea of asphalt, but we are providing a grass strip. But again, that's in an eye to reduce some of the impacts to the abutters themselves, while tying in the improvements to what they currently have on their property. So with that, that's basically a summary of our recommendations to the town, and with that, I'll turn it back over to Jesse to complete the presentation.
Thank you, Tom. So yeah, just quickly, I'm going to talk about some of the next steps and some of the process that we have been, going forward with in our approach for a town meeting and how that's changed from the last time we've spoken. So, yep.
Questions and what Tom basically said.
Yeah, that's a good idea. We can do that. We can do that. So technical focus questions, I'll probably be handing this to Tom almost every time. In the green.
So, we've had a fairly wet spring. Has the drainage been observed this spring been consistent with the models that you've measured, and you're feeling comfortable that we actually have the measurements that are giving us the right results?
Sure. Well, we have had a wet spring. I'll agree with you there. What we designed to is a high-intensity storm event, so that 10-year event, which, if I remember, I might not have the exact numbers, basically 5 3/4 inches of rain. And we have not had a singular event of that size and intensity. We would certainly know if we had a 10-year storm event. And I do not believe we've even had a 2-year storm event since these improvements were constructed. So I guess to answer your question, the system that's been installed hasn't really been tested to those levels. I know the ponding has been identified as an issue, and I think it was a little bit of a surprise to the town that our analysis showed that, but we are confident in the analysis that we've performed, and the fact that, it does not meet the 10-year storm. So.
In front of White Pond Road, you've got a drain that's on the property side rather than the street side. Is that going to be eliminated, or it's not? What is the purpose of that?
Yep. That was a part of the previous design. It was proposed by the previous designer. We are intending on keeping that. I know it does probably look a little odd. I believe there was a catch basin there before that was utilized for the roadway. Because, on the street side, yes. Because the grades are higher there, between the back of the sidewalk and that abutting property that's on the corner. If we eliminated that, they would then have a drainage issue, a ponding issue on that property.
We own the 2 houses on the corner of
Okay.
White Pond. We already have a drainage problem because of the sidewalks, but even worse on the other side, between the business property and where the fence is right now, it's 15 inches higher than the land now. In the front of the property, it's not even significant in comparison to that side. But are you going to put a drain wherever there's a low spot?
There is, so on the other side of your driveway from where that catch basin is, we identified that as a low spot as well. So we are proposing a smaller area drain. That's one of our recommendations to the town at that location. There may be some other options we can look at to eliminate any ponding on that side of the driveway as well.
So the height of the ground is still going to be a foot down or 18 inches down. Is that going to be ADA acceptable where the sidewalk has a drop off of 15 or 18 inches off the side? Even if you put a grassy curbing like you're talking about, you're still going to have 15 or 18 inches that drops off into our property?
We are trying to grade those slopes out as much as possible. We are trying to work with what we have there and not reconstruct everything. But that would be a typical situation that we could see on some of the sort of roadway, yes.
Okay. So my other question is, you're talking about how to round the corner of White Pond Road. Okay, well, when they had the V in the road, as we call it, a little island, people wouldn't necessarily take a right to go right or a left to go left. They'd be on either side of the island to go both ways. It didn't matter. But we watch cars come down at 35 miles an hour, 40 miles an hour around that corner all the time. One of the selling points of this project was to make that a 90-degree turn. 21 feet is what you're saying is the opening now. What is the average opening in town for all the other opening roads? To me, take another 3 feet off that, what you're suggesting, is just going to make that another high-speed roadway like it was before. People are going to go around that corner 35 miles an hour. They try and do it now with this 90, because that's what they're accustomed to. All we're doing is make it so we're getting back to where it used to be if you take 3 more feet off that corner.
From what I know of the intersection before, what we're proposing really isn't too much of a change. In fact, right at the intersection, It's not going to be that much wider. It's really just as you get around the corner, that's where we found that constriction of the geometry. So I think what you see out there today will really, it's going to look very similar to what it is, what it will be in the future based on our recommendations. So.
And it will be plans that we can look at before you start construction, before we appropriate money.
So yeah, I just want to, so as far as the individual property owners go, what our plan here is and what we've already begun, we've already had a few meetings now that we've got some of these alternatives from green. We wanted to set up essentially some office hours in town building where we can talk with those individual property owners. You can talk with the engineer here, and we can come up with and do the same kind of design analysis that we've done as a town and as a working group with some of these property owners, because there are a few instances where there are some different options. So that was part of what I wanted to talk about here in terms of what our next steps were. And certainly if there is something that is hyper local, a question here, somebody in a butter, when this forum kind of concludes, I'm happy to talk again with whoever that may be. So, Brian.
Thank you. First off, Sal, thanks very much for stepping in on this. We appreciate it. I might be asking some questions later on that might suggest otherwise, but I'm very grateful, and I think the town is grateful for you stepping in here. But just bear in mind, I want to make sure that I'm getting answers from engineers that are consistent with what we've been told indirectly from you guys. That's number one. Number two, I do hope that at some point we're going to break down the dollars and cents of each step of the project. I don't want you to get ahead of yourself. So I'm just expecting that, though. But the third question is to the technical side. One of my biggest concerns is how has this water drainage issue affected the abutters? We hear anecdotally, not to say that it's not accurate, but we just hear occasionally from some of the abutters. And we've heard in your assessment about the ponding on the road. One of my biggest concerns is how is this inadequate draining affecting the lawns and the properties of all the abutters, commercial and otherwise? Have you done that kind of an assessment? I didn't hear that much in your presentation. Or is this something that you're going to be doing on an ad hoc basis when people come in and tell you about their stories? Am I making sense?
I think so. Thinking mostly driveways and some of the other.
Yeah, I think most of the issues have been, like Jesse said, at the driveways themselves. And where that sidewalk is higher than some of the surrounding parking lots, that's where we really keyed in to make sure that there aren't drainage issues being created by that. And I know at the auto dealership, that was one area that was identified as ponding on private property.
The other ground, huge pond.
Sorry, which property? Oh, Beefinale, okay.
Beefinale, sorry.
Yes. So those were some of the issues that were identified, and we looked at the grading to make sure that those were all pitching to drain. So does that answer your question?
Well, yes, in part. And are you going to consider putting drains on some of these private properties? I mean, I think that next to the beef and ale, there was always some puddling, but it just seems awfully severe now. So is it something that you might have to consider as getting permission from private property owners to put a drain on their parking lots and everything?
So we did look at that as an option. I didn't explain that. We didn't get in, for tonight, we didn't want to get into all the individual property issues at different properties. But we did look at that as where we identified issues. We looked at adding drains as an option. We need to tie that drain into somewhere. And we also looked at options to basically regrade some areas in order to get that area to drain and eliminate the ponding. And what we found is that we were able to do that at what we estimate to be a lower cost than installing a new catch basin and connecting that to the closed drainage system. If we have to connect those all to the closed drainage system, that has additional traffic impacts and all sorts of different aspects that we considered in that analysis. So what we found for the most part is that we could eliminate most of the drainage issues by looking at the grading and fixing it with that way.
The one thing I just want to make sure that you do, and then I'll shut up, is, for now, is that you reach out to especially the residential abutters, because they're the ones, I mean, I'm worried about their lawns, I've heard stories about their lawns, I'm worried about, if you have to park somewhere else next to the Beef and Ale to get to the ATM, it's not the end of the world. But these people who have to live there, they're the ones who have to have puddles on their front lawns. And I'm not sure how many of those people are, but I want to make sure that you guys are reaching out to those people, especially our neighbors right there in the corner of White Pond and Great Road.
Tom, I'd like to just follow up directly to, I think, help answer Brian's question, just from the time we spent on the project. The issue I think that you're referring to is near Beef and Ale on 118 Great Road is actually an issue with the closed drainage system on a private property. And from what we know during the construction period, from what we still know now, it doesn't appear that anything that happened on the roadway contributes to what is going on there. In fact, after a meeting with some of the property owners, there's been discussion of some drain that used to be running towards the back of one property that may now be blocked. So in fact, the town on several occasions, or I'm sorry, not the town, but our contractor at the time had brought to our attention, hey, you know, we've got water coming over the private property into the streetscape. That is something we want to look at. So there's one of those rare examples where we're seeing kind of an opposite effect there. But that particular spot, you know, definitely deserves a little more look to make sure that we can verify that. But that's something that we've been trying to address now for the last several months.
Reached out to all the residential property owners affected along the stretch of Great Road.
We've spoken with letters have gone out to everyone, emails for where we have them. I've had the superintendent of streets knock on doors when we couldn't get in touch with somebody. So, so the answer is yes. Still ongoing.
You'd mentioned Rich Echo, 53 Adams Drive. I'm on the finance committee too. My question is, you mentioned that a lot of some of the sidewalks aren't ADA compliant. And my question is that it sounds like a lot of this is a design flaw or poor execution of design, whatever you want to call it, screw ups. Is any of that, and I don't know if this is a question for you or if it's even the appropriate time now to talk about it, but is any of that an execution issue? Like, is this all just like poor planning and we just had construction guys that looked at the plans and didn't say, that doesn't look right? Or did they not build to a standard that they were supposed to? I guess I'm a little perplexed. Is this just all bad planning? Or is there an execution part of this too?
Yeah, and if I imply that the sidewalks aren't, that is probably the words that I use, that they're not ADA compliant. From what we can tell, the cross slopes of the sidewalks meet ADA regulations as they're constructed today. But in order to install some of the wheelchair ramps that were not constructed in the kind of at the end of in the fall because they were trying to button up the project, to get those all to work and to also work with the driveway, with some of the driveway aprons, and make sure that it's all ADA compliant in the end, is that that's why some of those sidewalks need to be reconstructed, so you have an ADA compliant situation when we're done. So
is this an exception in the sense of what, I guess what I'm trying to get at is, that's one specific issue, but more broadly, is any of this an execution problem? You know, did that part of that side of the, taking the plans and making it happen, does that have anything to do, or is it simply just poor design? I guess I'm still a little confused, and I've actually talked quite a bit about it. On the finance committee, I actually have access to a lot of people, like Justin and so forth. I'm still confused. I don't know why the construction companies didn't understand, see these issues, raise them sooner.
I'm Sue Carter. engineering consultant for the planning board. I did not get called into the project till late in the project. I think to answer your question, some of it is a case of they knew there were going to be changes to be made, and when we stopped it, had the process proceeded, some of these sidewalks would have been in compliance, and that's what the contractor was aiming for when we stopped it before it was completed, and did an as-built of them without the completion, without having the pavement come in. It isn't ADA compliant. There was a section of sidewalk that was flagged out that had changed during the construction process that was going to have to be rebuilt, and that was identified early on because they were looking at redoing some grades while they were under construction at the direction of the other design engineer. So it was a little bit of it that it was a moving target, as well as the fact that we stopped them before they could complete it because we knew things would change. We just weren't sure where and how much a change would be needed to bring it into compliance. So,
But even just like broadly, like these cross planes, these profile planes that seem to be inadequate, built for a 2-year instead of a 10-year standard, who's missing that? I mean, it sounds like the design engineers said, this is fine, but why wasn't people with practical knowledge that build roads for a living, happens to be a Stow resident, the company here, why didn't they notice and say, hey, you know what? This should have been a 10-year standard. I have not heard a good explanation for that.
as coming into it late in the process, I'm not sure it was ever identified. Construction companies assume that if the plan is designed and stamped by a professional engineer, that they knew what they were doing. Same thing for the planning board. They had to rely on the professionals. The contractor was going based on a plan that was approved, and I know there was a lot of give and take between the contractor and the other design engineer, which resulted in changes along the way. But to say that the construction company should have known better, I didn't know it didn't meet the 2-year storm until Green did the work. I just did some raw calcs and said, wait a second, I think we have an issue. And then we all got into the process of saying, do we keep going forward, or do we take a pause, winterize it, and figure out what's really going on before we spend a lot more money, only to find out we have to undo everything we just did. And that was where we were last fall. And then the concern was to get that road through winter so that it's drivable, it didn't impact the businesses, and like even the removal of the islands, that was a safety issue. And at that point, our gut reaction was those islands, the grades around the islands are probably going to change. So get them out of there so it's not a safety hazard. But I think it's hard to go back and say that it wasn't constructed properly because it was a changing target. And last fall, the group got together and said there were issues, and we feel like we need to stop and figure out what's going on.
I just want to be clear. I know you asked a specific question, but then tried to generalize the question. The fact is that ET&L was asking questions all along the way, but the person who was guiding them was a design engineer from the company who designed it. And so, quite frankly, they were given more direction to change in the field. So eventually, enough questions surfaced, enough change orders surfaced that we started to question the whole thing, and that's how it started to unravel. So I just want to make sure, the answer to your question is we believe that there are design deficiencies. I think Green has pretty much demonstrated that they agree that there are design deficiencies, and quite frankly, more than we even knew. So I don't want to sit here and say there was a construction problem. The construction, they were asking questions all along the way of issues that they were seeing, and were getting direction from the design engineer. So.
No, that's, thanks for giving. My understanding that I heard was that it wasn't until the pavement guy came in and said, I'm not going to guarantee the work, that people said, we got a problem, and it sounds like that's not the right narrative. So
Certainly an inflection.
Katie Fisher. I know more about plumbing than I do drainage, I'll be honest with you. But when you have a pipe that's one size, which I guess is 12, And you have a lot of sources that are going into that one pipe that goes down by Malone, is my understanding?
Correct.
Okay. So you have a 10-year flood or rain. When you get so much volume of water going into one small pipe, which I think that little drainage thing is in front of my house, I'm at One White Pond, water comes up out of it. So it comes out like a pop. So if the underground drainage is not increased to a size capacity to carry all that down past my house, it's all going to end up in my yard. And I already have a sprinkler system. So I don't really, so that's why I was curious about the different options you're looking at and how they would affect that volume of water that's undersized pipe. And if we got a 100-year flood, we had that major flood last year before, I think actually before this all started, where we had huge puddles. Would this new design hold that flow? Was that a 10-year, or was that a 50-year, or was it a 100-year?
That storm in particular, I don't know what level that storm was that you're referring to. Our recommendation would get the system up to a capacity of a 10-year storm. And to answer your question, now I'm not surprised that you are seeing that water coming out of that catch basin.
I'm actually
when.
not, it's coming down from the neighbor's yard.
Okay.
We're the lowest point, and all the businesses are at a higher grade. So with the sidewalks, there's a dam. So all the water that runs through their parking lot that used to go out into the street is now dammed up. It used to come to my yard partially, but it comes across, and in my front yard, the kids now call they used to call my house Grandma's Castle, and now you've created a moat to go with the castle. So it's quite wet there, particularly with the snow melt.
So we will certainly look at that further. And as far as the size, you asked about the size of the drain and 12-inch versus 15-inch. One way to make sure that we have enough capacity would be to just upgrade the pipes like we talked about. Our other alternative that we looked at is basically providing more storage at the lower common with expanding that infiltration system that was already installed. And basically that will store and hold back enough water to meet that 10-year storm. And then it will slowly be released through the closed drainage system that's already been installed, and then down to the low point at Malone, I believe it's called, right? So that's
How would you account for just put bigger pipes in, so they'll have more volume storage, and then it goes into the 15-inch pipe that goes down to Malone's, that would slowly leach into that? So you gain volume between White Pond to how far back?
from basically the entire drainage system up to where to the post office is.
Okay, so from the post office up to White Pond, you're gonna change the pipe from a 15-inch pipe?
No, our recommendation is to not upgrade the pipe that's within the roadway. It's to only increase the size of the infiltration system that's at the town lower common to basically create a storage area that would store the stormwater and slowly release it back.
Where is that? Where is that storage system?
Where is it?
Where the Christmas tree is.
Yeah, it's below ground. So it was installed as a part of the project.
Very good. Thank you.
Tom, thanks very much again for this detailed presentation and granting your question. I'm having a hard time understanding what you're saying will happen with the larger WB50 trucks and your recommended design. Can you give me an example of a WB50 truck and what you mean by encroachment? I'm hoping you just mean going into the oncoming lane of traffic.
Yes, that is what I mean. A WB50 is just your typical semi-trailer with a cab and a trailer on the back. There is one version that's slightly bigger, which is called a WB67, but we're looking at a WB50, which is slightly smaller. Those are just references to how long the overall vehicle is. Those different designations on the trucks.
Assuming encroachment doesn't mean onto the property.
No, staying within the roadway footprint between the curb lines. Encroachment just means that they would take some of the opposing lane on White Pond Road. They would not have to encroach into opposing lanes on Great Road in order to make that turn movement when you go from Great Road onto White Pond.
They won't have to swing out.
They would not have to swing out. They would swing into oncoming traffic on White Pond Road. Okay. But again, the SU40s, the fire trucks, and the school buses would not have to encroach into opposing lanes.
Thank you.
But most of the other streets in town, they have to do that anyway. You go to Hastings Street or Taylor Road, or Packard Road, any of those roads, they have to make that swing to get through anyway, the trailers, including the school buses, which actually slows the traffic down, which makes it much more palatable for not having a raceway in front of your house.
If I understood correctly, you said earlier that you prefer to build the road to have a 2% grade from center to the sides, but now you're recommending that Mass DOT has a minimum 1% and that we just go to that minimum standard. Any particular reason why not go to the 2%?
There are some additional grading challenges that come with that. So if we change one grade here, it affects something else. So that's something we're going to fine tune a little bit more. We are trying to come up with a design that would provide as steep of a cross slope as possible, as close to that 2%. In some places it might be even a little bit steeper. The more cross slope you can get, the better we can help the roadway drainage and reduce those spreads. Based off of our preliminary look at the grades out there and what we have to work with, we don't think we can achieve that 2% everywhere, and that you may have some cross slopes that are less than that 2%. So that's kind of it's a fine tuning that we're working with. So we're trying to get that 2% everywhere, but we don't think it's achievable absolutely everywhere. So.
Tom is basically describing what we asked for in our proposal of green, was here would be our ideal standard to get us to. We recognize this road has got some issues, just inherent in the, just in its nature. And if there are areas that you would go below the 2%, what have you, that is part of the reason why we were working with Places Associates, so then we could turn to somebody we've been working with a long time, who's also somebody who can peer review and say, hey, can you give us some advice on maybe lowering the standard in this area? What's the cost benefit? Are there other options we can do to mitigate any issue in that location? So this was kind of the built-in process that we had expected to be doing.
Well, I think one of the reasons I'm asking this is because I've only lived in Stow for about 12 years, and I never saw anything happen on 117 like what happened last summer when there was that one rainstorm this woman was talking about. And if I remember correctly, there was a car stalled because of the water at the entrance to Shaw's parking lot. Everything was great up until the construction started. Things went downhill after the construction started. What went wrong, and is 1% enough to make sure that doesn't go wrong? I know you're upgrading the exit of the waterways, but is just adding more drainage along the road waterway and keeping it at 1% going to make sure that we don't have more cars stalling at Shaw's?
Sure. I don't know exactly what led to that situation.
I
Maybe
do
just so you
remember
can.
it was about 3 and some odd inches in about an hour. And it was at a time, and I don't know exactly how this plays into it, but it was at a time when we were right in the middle of replacing the drainage system. And I don't know the technicalities of what was working at that time or might have been functioning less than ideal, but it was right in the middle of construction. Yeah. So,
Being in the middle of construction and not knowing how that system was functioning, that would be a tough question for me to answer.
So that's something we can face this year while the upgrades are being done as well.
While our recommendations would at least make sure that we're meeting the 10-year storm, and that, if it was 3 inches of rain on that storm, it would have that capacity. So.
Okay.
I do think that one of the issues with that was, at the time, the grates were higher than the roadway. So everywhere along the way, all the grates and all the sewer covers, they were all higher than the roadway. So if water doesn't go uphill, so it couldn't get up into the drains until we were already at a flood.
I can see how that would play into it.
Just a question about the choice of going to additional drains as opposed to grading, which I imagine is driven in part by cost. Is there a maintenance cost associated with maintaining additional drains that's higher than the maintenance cost associated with maintaining a rebuilt road?
Sure. We looked at whether or not new catch basins would be needed on both options. So the regrading of the road, as we're proposing, needed 9 additional structures. Even if we did the full depth and got everything perfect to a 2% cross slope minimum and a 0.5% profile. We still estimated, I think it was either 7 or 8 catch basins were still needed under that option. So there really isn't much of a cost savings there at all. As far as maintenance, I don't know exactly, we haven't had that discussion of what the town does. Typically, most towns have to end up cleaning out their catch basins once every year or so. So you would have more to do, but you are typically doing that anyway.
My question is how long the road actually is supposed to last? It's down to, they scraped it up, I don't know what the term is. And then you put another layer of asphalt on top. I do know that that doesn't last as long as if you strip it completely and rebuild the road. What's the length of time you'd expect the road to last with this option versus going down to, I'll say dirt, I don't know what the term is.
Correct. When we do a full reconstruction, typically we would expect that to last 20 to 25 years. We did do a pavement design based off of reconstructing the roadway as a part of our analysis. Because we're not recommending that due to the estimated costs, that doesn't really play a factor into what we're talking about here. So we haven't done an analysis of how long this design will last, but we've been told that there is actually a considerable amount of pavement that's already been put down in excess of 12 inches in some locations. There is chance of reflective cracking when you do an overlay. But that's a given any time that you're overlaying a roadway. The leveling course that we're proposing should help reduce the chance of reflective cracking over time. Reflective cracking is when you have a crack in the roadway already and you see it reflecting back up a couple years later through the base. So there is a chance you could have reflective cracking in the future. But compared to the full depth, the cost of the full depths, we're recommending the overlay.
I just want to add on to that unlike what you saw happening last year where leveling courses had a little bit here, a little bit there, and it was sort of hopscotch going down the street, what's being proposed now is a minimum of a 1/2 inch going upwards to as much as 3 or 4 inches in the crown, so that we're not going to have the hopscotch and every single start and stop is a potential for the cracks to come through. And when we first got this presentation, Mike Clayton and I both felt better about it. The other thing that was discussed is if there are areas where there are concerns about the cracks reflecting through, we're going to get an estimate to put a geotextile down, almost like if you do a fiberglass mesh on your wall because you're patching your wall and you don't want to have it, the crack to show. It's sort of like that on pavement. We're going to get an estimate from them if there are any areas. Mike has indicated that because they had permanent trench patches in the roadway, he's not as concerned because it has sat through a winter. So we're looking at it for the longevity. So you're going to have a minimum of a 1/2 inch of a leveling course, and this is going to be continuous over the whole road. And then they're going to come in and put 1.5 inches of top course of pavement on it, which is typical for roads. So you're getting a little bit better of a product than we would have had with last year's design because it's going to be a continuous leveling course. And we felt this was a really important benefit with this design so that we'll be less likely to see the cracks, and it's a more uniform. And just as you have glue between your layers of plywood, they'll be putting what's called tack coat between it. So these layers will be glued together. It'll be on the existing pavement, leveling course, and then before they put the top on it. So we're hoping that it's going to be a much sturdier end product. Mike Clayton indicated that there are parts of the roadway right now that have up to 16 inches of pavement. So when we talk reclamation, it's not just taking out 4 inches of pavement. If you have 16 inches of pavement, that's a considerable job. And I think that puts a little bit of a different perspective on when you ask about, is the other method a better way? That's a lot of pavement, it's an old road, it's had a lot of work over time. So that's where we were coming from.
Our pavement design showed 5.5 inches of pavement was what was required. And as Sue said, there are some locations where you have 12 or 16 inches of pavement down there already. So there should be sufficient pavement down on the ground.
Thanks, Tom. I think what I'd like to do is just kind of get to some of these next step slides. We'll talk about some of the cost implications here. we can talk about design, of course, again. I just want to make sure, in case anyone does have to leave here. Do you have the clicker? Here it is, thank you. That wasn't it. I'm going to rely on you to tell me how to use this one.
In our money's worth.
You broke it.
We're going to do that the old-fashioned way. Next steps. So we talked about the next steps in project design. If you just want to go to the next slide for me. So what I want to describe here is what the annual town meeting process looked like. So everybody got in their warrant, unfortunately, a warrant that's stated Article 34 with a target on it for $500,000. That was a plug number we used early on in this project before we were able to get a report from Green and to really understand the technical nature of the issues that we were expecting and planning to deal with. So I'll get into the construction costs in a second, but the approach here that I think we felt was making a lot of sense was that we could potentially break the town meeting up into two pieces. So we could go forward at this town meeting with costs that were really focused on design. And inside of the cost on here, the $137,500, inside of that cost is really a year's worth of legal costs. It is the remaining design contract with Green to get us to the point where we have 100% design construction plans. It accounts for some of the incidentals, some of the meetings, all the little things that go into this, and some of the questions that we're still working on answering as we go through the alternatives. So that number there really would be, the purpose of the $137,000 would be to get us to that point when we have final construction plans. The next step after that, and you know, we know what it was like in May of 2017 when we were struggling to get an estimate all the way up to town meeting, and clearly an estimate that was not accurate. Our goal this time around is to make sure that we have done the necessary design alternative analysis, that we've worked with our project team, with Places Associates, and with our contractor ET&L to really get an understanding of are the alternatives that we've chosen, are they going to be feasible? Are these things that ET&L agrees are constructible? Are we all on the same page? And then can we get a number that really reflects the actual construction costs so that we are not in the same position we were in 2017, coming to town meeting hoping that this estimate is going to hold. We want to be, for everybody's sake, for our own and for all the residents and the voters, we want to make sure that we are that much more certain about the costs going forward with construction. And quite frankly, we're just not there yet. We are at a point where we now understand from the report that we received from Green what the main issues are. We've already gotten to the point where our working group and with Places are trying to understand the different alternatives and centering on those, but there are definitely, as Tom described, there's a few items that really do need a further look here, and so that's why we're holding off on going to this town meeting asking for a number that includes all design and all construction going forward. You know, the mechanics of town meeting aside, it appears that we'd be able to reconvene the town meeting later in June, provided that it provides us enough time to get this number correctly. Our main goal is to try to reconvene prior to the fiscal year turning over, which is July 1st. So we will be working as fast as possible with all the partners that we have to try to get that to happen in June. The next step after that is the actual construction itself. So basically what Green has provided in their report is, here are some base numbers of the absolute minimum that you should be doing on the roadway to get it functional. And that number right now is $890,000. More than the 500 that was in the plug. Now, the reason why we're still not coming forward with a number at this town meeting is that there were a number of different potential design options of which we are trying to choose between. For instance, Green provided us what we did not know before, which was that closed drainage system was built to the 2-year storm. So Green has said, hey, we can either replace some of the pipes, we can enlarge the infiltration system. This is something that obviously we are right now trying to focus on what is going to be the answer there. It sounds like we're believing and we agree with Green's idea that, yeah, the infiltration system may be the cheaper option. It looks like that is something that's probably more feasible. That's what we're doing right now. That's why this number is likely going to be bigger than 890. Our thinking right now is that it'll be somewhere just north of $1 million when we come back to town meeting. I provide that just so to not have the sticker shock when we get there, but we're trying to figure out what that costs look like. The reason for those costs are everything that Green just described. Obviously, you know, we have some mixed emotions here. We're incredibly disappointed. This was a long-time project of the planning board. This was something we were more excited about than any other project we worked on, so to see it in this state is hard. At the same time, we're grateful that we've got somebody like Green and we've got this new approach, and that we didn't finish the project when we were uncertain, and that we have an ability to go back and get it done right. So, you know, there's a couple sides of the coin here, and we understand both of them. So that's the approach that we're planning to take at town meeting. I wanted to get that out there. I can try to answer questions as best I can about kind of the mechanics of that, and we can certainly talk more about the technical aspects as well. Yes.
I was at the April 17th meeting where you explained how much money was spent for the design that is now defunct, and that this project, as reimagined over the winter, would be $150,000 for design, including $60,000 for supervision during construction by the designer, which is something that didn't happen last year. How does that jive with the 137.5?
So I'm not really sure if that number that we were talking about was the previous designer with the 60,000 aspect.
Including $60,000 for construction supervision by the new designer, whose name we did not know last month.
Yeah. So the construction supervision. So let me tell you where we're at right now. So we had a contract from Green. That contract, I believe, it was 115. I think maybe that's where we were missing or miscommunicating there. 115 was that contract. I believe 40,000 of that was for the construction administration and oversight. So part of that money we had already had left over on items that we had not yet finished on the project. We had part of that funding, so we were able to pay for some of that design just to get us going, to get us to where we are right now. And that this number really entails the basically the rest of that design money. I don't believe this even entails the construction oversight. That is something that we had intended to include in kind of these construction funds. So I know it's easy to get lost in those details, but that's how the contract was broken up. It was design and construction oversight, and of which this is a part.
And for design was the analysis that we just received. So unlike starting from scratch, when you're asking someone to design a project, they first need to decompose what we had. So that takes time and money as well. This also includes year one legal to
Yeah, it does.
I don't think
go
I got
after the problem.
I don't think I got my question answered the
Okay,
way
let
I
me
asked
try
it, which
again.
is about the supervision.
Okay.
It's the supervision of the construction after the design is done and settled by going through those steps that are on that three-element arrow chart. Is the supervision by the design company included in this number?
Yes, it is. It is included in.
No. He's talking supervision of construction.
What?
So
The designer's supervision of the work as it's going on to make sure that questions that in the past were expected for the ET&L to raise the question, which is not really their job. For the designer to say, this is the way it's supposed to be, and if he discovers a problem, fix it on the spot. That was, 2 weeks ago, you said $60,000 for construction supervision during, once the construction starts.
yes, that's correct.
Okay.
For-
That was
no.
included in the number that you had. Now, my question is that included in the 137.5?
So what this number includes is all of the rest of the item in that design contract that we have not yet spent. And in that design contract, inclusive of that, is also the construction administration fees. So yes, they are in that number.
Okay.
Thank
try
you.
and ask this as tactfully as possible. Sure. We're in this situation because a designer was selected, and it was assumed that the designer designed according to standards, and was professional, and we took it on faith that everything was correct. Green has come in, fortunately, and has shown us that there were some lacking designs. No offense to Tom, but how do we know they haven't?
That's why we had Susan.
Places Associates is a key part of that. Going into this project on the first time, we did not have a peer reviewing engineer with us on that. We made the assumption of professionalism based on the plans that we received. So not only that, we've got a lot more folks here in town that we are now involved with on the project team that are able to kind of help within that, as well as having Sue here. So our working group is now established, different department heads working with Sue. So we have tried to kind of create this belt and suspenders approach.
So that means in the future we know now to always have someone like Sue.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I assume that this will bring about some lessons learned discussions and how we want to go forward. I would just imagine that the selectmen, town administrator, others, the gears are turning, and I think that we'll see where that goes. But for right now, we feel adequate.
137.5 actually includes some hours for Sue.
Okay, right.
It does. Thank you, Laura.
Include what?
It does include some of the costs that we're expecting to have peer review with Places Associates look at the plans. Yeah.
So will there be, you talk about a working group, et cetera, is going to oversee this next phase or whatever this is. So, this has gone from a project that was a modest capital project to actually a very, very significant capital project for the town. And when we are doing a significant capital project, we actually have a building committee for those efforts. So is there a formal building committee with, open meeting minutes, et cetera, that's going to be created to shepherd this project from where it is today to its completion?
That's a good question. It may not be mine completely to answer. I can say that the planning board is still somewhat of the steering committee on this. I've been advised by the town administrator to have a working group of different department heads, Sue Carter and others, to help kind of steer this process as we go along. So if somebody comes to me and says we need a formal committee standalone, a subcommittee, I'm happy to turn whatever group that we have right now into that, but that hasn't come to me yet. Rich?
I had a question, just roughly in terms of cost. We've spent 2.3 million? I mean, we spent, 2.3 million? Sorry, what? 1.6 million so far?
So we had a contract for, it's about 2.118, somewhere in there, yep.
So that's how much we spent so far, or that's what the contract was for?
That's about where we are right now.
So we spent 2.1, and we're talking another another 900 to, I've heard as high as 1.3.
Yep.
So we're talking over $3 million. Safely between $3 and $3.5 million for the total cost.
That's possible, yeah. That's possible.
My question's more technical related to town meeting. What kind of motion is actually going to be put on the table, and is this town meeting going to close, and we're going to have another town meeting in June? So logistically, how does that work?
I'm not an expert on town meeting logistics, but the way this has been described to me is that there will. Is there a town? Thank you. That would be ideal.
So the question,
Oh, is town meeting, what's the motion for this particular article for the 137? Are they just modifying this for that amount and then closing the town meeting? And then
no, the
having
town
a
meeting
town
won't be closed. So what the proposal that I was asked to approve, which was all legitimate when I looked at it, is to split the article into two pieces, one for design and related expenses, one for construction and related expenses. And then to move the piece for construction to the end of the meeting. And then
when we're done with everything else, adjourn to, I think it was June 19th is the date that they're looking at, whatever it was. Adjourn the meeting, so the meeting would just be continued. It just, instead of going from Monday to Tuesday night, it'd be going from Monday to Wednesday night, 6 weeks later. And then the only thing that we'd be taking up at the meeting 6 weeks later is the construction, the second half of the article for construction. Now, the other option that we could have done was simply change the motion to only be for design and related funds into a special town meeting in June. That requires 5 to 6 weeks of lead time, and it'd be a real, it wouldn't be a marathon, it'd be a sprint to get all of the process done. So I said, yeah, legally, we're allowed to adjourn the meeting to June. And legally, we can split the article.
That's my next question, is the funds, where do they actually come from out of the budget? Is there a
The
proposal?
funds would be coming, it is proposed to come from free cash, which is another reason why it would have to be done by the end of June. For those that don't do municipal finance, free cash we can't use after July 1st until the state recertifies it, which doesn't happen until September or October. So it's sort of like we have money in the checking account, but you can't touch it until the state says you can touch it. And it stays certified until the end of June the next year. So we have to get this done with the funding source that they're looking at by.
Yeah, just to add a little more color to that, we have to use free cash because you can't borrow for it. If we're going to borrow for it, you have to wait till the bonding goes through. So the plan is always to spend free cash.
Also probably stabilization fund, which is similar to free cash, but it requires a 2/3 vote, depending on the amount.
What about the construction? What about the construction costs? Where is that gonna, is that gonna be an override?
That's what he's talking about.
Okay.
No, that's what he's talking about.
Okay, very good. Okay, very good. Is the hope to finish this construction at the end of the construction season for 2019?
That's what our original and preliminary design schedule is, yeah. So I would think unless something comes up that we have not yet encountered, the plan was still to be done by October.
So even with all this ballet dance at town meetings and finance?
That's why we're here, trying to make this happen as quickly as possible. Yeah, exactly.
And we also have been keeping ET&L in the loop so that they can indicate to us as well.
It shouldn't be much of a delay. You obviously have to do design first anyway. So you do that. As soon as design's done, you have your town meeting. Assuming it gets voted, the next day the money's available to start doing construction. Sure, there may be a week or so delay between when the design plans are done and they're sitting there waiting for the town meeting, but it should be pretty.
I guess I'm trying to also figure out to correct the mistakes that were done before, blah, blah, blah. From the start of construction, do we still have enough time, whenever that starts, to the end of the construction season to get this whole project done? I don't know construction, so.
Right, that's what you gotta figure out, you gotta do the schedule as part of the design. That's the way it works.
Yeah, preliminarily, yes, and that's what we're refining, and we hope that holds.
Once Green does the design, then ETL will basically come in and do their own estimate, and I'm sure they'll be part of the discussion along the way anyways. But they're the ones who need to tell us, is it possible?
So we don't know for sure.
Again, we've kept them in the loop all along, so right now, all parties believe.
I just want to go over some of these dollars and cents. That $2.1 million figure that you quoted, and that is what my understanding is. Does that include the state aid?
Yes.
Yes. So, yeah.
I want to make sure that we understand what the town has in the game right now.
So let me try to just explain again the baskets of funding that we had. We received the $850,000 grant from MassWorks. As the project got going, we recognized that our contingency wasn't as good as where we wanted it to be. The state awarded us an additional $150,000. We ended up with $1 million from the state. Town meeting appropriated $492,000 in, I think it was Article 52 in May 2017. The Highway Department had for several years been putting aside Chapter 90 state highway funds for the project to the tune of $400,000. The other piece, there were some other small ones. We had some sidewalk funds from the planning board. The only other large chunk that was added to this was in the fall of 2018 as we tried to resolve some of the technical issues that we were looking at. We needed a large amount of pavement that the designer had proposed to us, and we looked to our Chapter 90 highway funds because it was funding that was available at the time, and we thought we may be able to get this project done. That was $180,000. We didn't end up spending it all. Some of that is going to be put back into the construction amounts that we see here if we go forward at town meeting. So I think that covers all the major pieces.
And how much, and I remember that originally, when we were planning this about a month and a half ago, the highway department was going to get back its Chapter 90 money. Is that still going to be the case?
Yeah, if I remember in the warrant correctly, I think it's listed at 175 or 172. There is an article for them to recoup some of those funds.
Coming out of surplus, not out of the tax levy.
Okay.
Thank you.
We have that already. All right, do we have that figure already?
It's in the warrant.
Okay.
I think he's right, it's like 170.
Yeah, but I mean, the numbers in the warrant keep changing. Let me ask just a few more questions on dollars and cents, and then one just general question, which is how much do we owe Ms. Carter and Mr. Green's firms right today, right through tonight?
Are you asking how much have we paid them, or how
much
do we have bills payable here?
How much is payable? I'd like to hear from them. And I know you don't have a bill in your pocket, but if you can ballpark it.
I can say that we recently paid Sue an estimate, so I feel like we're pretty solid.
Just a couple of meetings that I've attended, so we're probably $100,000.
I'm sorry?
Probably $1,500, $1,000 to $1,500.
Okay,
It
thank
hasn't been that much going right now.
Mr. Green?
As far as what we've been paid so far?
I think he's thinking of the delta between what we have paid you already and maybe what you've accrued prior to your next invoice. I think that's.
Yeah, I just want to know what you think you're going to charge after tonight. Not to say that you're going to stop working after tonight, just want to get a sense right up and
After tonight, through design, through the rest of design?
What do you have on the books if you put your time tonight?
I would say it's probably 20,000 or something.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
I don't know the exact number though.
Yeah, I'm not asking for the exact number, just trying to get a ballpark.
Smaller than a bread box, Bill, bigger than.
Yeah, the other thing, so we've got the 21.5 and then the 137.5, and I know it's not all for design, there's some incidentals there, but that should completely take you through the design process, submitting plans to ET&L, is that correct?
We are scoped out and provided a cost to the town through design, yes. And we provided estimates for construction administration as well.
And is that the same amount? Will all that fit under the 137.5?
Tom was not necessarily involved in how we took all of our baskets and put them together in that number. That was really more of a question for the working group. Sukar, Lori Clark, our highway superintendent, and others. But yes, that was the intention, was that all of that was built into this number so that we could get to the point of construction. Now,
But it would get us to the point where we could submit plans to ET&L for scheduling and pricing, but it would also take into account, just to confirm, Mr. Green and Ms. Carter's fees for oversight going forward.
yes, certainly Greens. Now, just one caveat there is I'm still working with the town administrator to just kind of nail down exactly what Places Associates' role will be once we really get going. How much over, what kinds of designs, what kinds of reports are we expecting back from her? So there's a little bit of wiggle room there.
Yeah, but
The intention was there, yes.
This was in the, now here's the last question I got, but it's a more overall question. I have been told that, as you pointed out, Jesse, we were rushing last year this time, we're rushing again this time. It's a very awkward and uncomfortable feeling. I have been told by people in the town administration and other elected officials that it's inadvisable to wait any longer to try and settle things out, maybe put things out to bid. And I respect and trust what I've been told, but as an elected official, I need to hear from the engineers. Is it inadvisable to try and put this off till next year till we get a better sense and we're going along in a more measured pace to make these corrections that you were recommending? And again, I don't have any reason to doubt what I've been told, but I need to hear from an engineer.
When we took this job on, we looked at what the design schedule that the town was asking for, and we have the forces to get our design effort done. I believe our schedule has us providing the 100% design by the end of this month, by May. And we are confident that we can pull through with that. And with what we expect for work, we would estimate that the contractor would be able to finish it by this construction season. Some of that depends on the contractors themselves.
As I said before, I appreciate you stepping in, appreciate your helping out here in a rush. But my question is, should we be in a rush? Should we maybe wait until the next construction season when a lot of the time isn't so compressed? Again, I have been told that's inadvisable, but I think I need to hear it from an engineer.
Can I maybe follow up on Brian's question here?
I haven't got an answer. When I get an answer, then you can follow up.
No, it's relevant to the time it is. So in your presentation here tonight, you actually illustrated very, very significant deficiencies in the prior designs. But all of those deficiencies are centered around flow of water, right? In the context of artery roads. What other deficiencies were you asked to look at with regard to the previous designs? So is it designed with regard to traffic flow, etc., and how to access the road during peak hours, the width of lanes, for instance, the turning right on Red Acre roads? How much of those type of deficiencies have you actually looked at?
I respect that, but I don't see how that's a follow-up, but okay, if you can answer both. Just make sure you remember who asked the first question. That's right.
I guess, to your question, we have not looked at the traffic analysis that is part of the background of the design. The town had indicated that was not something that we had been requested to look at. The core issues, like you said, were the drainage, the grading, and some of the site accessibility issues is the core of what we have looked at, and some of the constructability issues as well to go along with the design.
But then how do we know that this is a fully designed project? And that gets back to Brian's question. Are you rushing to pave something here right now, just fixing drainage, and then we're going to have another study on traffic issues post this?
I want to try to answer your question a little better, just having been here a while now. It feels like a while at least. And I think I've been done in a good way. The traffic plan itself, Howard Stein Hudson, when we got involved with that plan in 2013, we were not starting from scratch. We were building on a few plans that came before it. So a lot of the core elements that are in this plan that we had going forward on the traffic, on the technical traffic analysis part, were built on a lot of elements that came from prior designers before that, from Kohler and Colantonio, from FST, from ideas that had been vetted and put forward. And what we asked the previous designer specifically to do was, we had known that there were a couple of points where there had been disagreements from various folks in town and just from anecdotally, and we asked them, look, we've had all these plans in the past, can you take a look at them and try to figure out, what were can you modernize this a little bit? Let's do some updated counts. Can you look at a couple of the areas with fresh eyes, specifically around Pompo Center Street, those kinds of areas, and really provide us a design that is going to actually take care of some of those issues? Because some of the plans before that didn't seem like they were, they just didn't seem to have the same effect, or that they would have the same outcome that we were looking for. So all I'm saying is that this was not something that we asked this design firm to come up with out of the blue, but we have kind of been building towards this for a while. And that is one of the reasons why we did not ask Green to go back and try to redesign the entire fundamental traffic analysis here. We ran into technical deficiencies. We needed to understand what they were to finish the project. And that's always been, I think, the planning board and the working group's goal was to figure that part out.
Can we go back to my question?
Back to the question as to why do it now and not wait another year. Some of the concerns that would be going on are obviously construction costs, cost of pavement, everything, all of those costs continue to escalate. So waiting another year, you're going to have another factor of just raw cost of materials and labor and everything else. The other thing that you have to look at is we did sort of button it up for the winter. So there are issues where the berms aren't backed up and you have puddles behind the berms, water seeping under the berms to get into the street. So the other concern we would have would be damage that would occur by having the road in its current condition for another full calendar year. That when you go to start up a year from now, rather than this year, you may have more damage and more work you have to do to retroactively get the road ready to move forward. So that was one of the considerations that we saw, and I think that's reflected in why the drainage might look like it's working, but it really isn't.
We also have had a very light winter.
Right.
I think we need to recognize that as well.
That was explained to me generally, and I had no reason to doubt it, but I needed to hear from an engineer with more specifics exactly what might happen if we wait another year, even though from a planning perspective, that would be optimal. But both of your recommendations that if we continue to wait, not in addition to perhaps higher construction costs, which is hard to quantify, you also feel that there's a significant risk of continuing damage that will contribute to more drainage problems. Did I hear that from both of you?
Maybe not drainage problems, but you may have more deterioration of what hasn't been fully constructed and fully buttoned up just by it not being finished off. So that is certainly one aspect of it.
And that estimated damage cost would exceed any advantages from waiting a year to see if we can put all this stuff in a better order, in your opinion?
That is a little difficult to quantify, to know exactly what would potentially deteriorate and what wouldn't. But I believe that it is this can be constructed this year. This can be finished this year.
Do you agree?
I do, and I think we also have to consider the impact on the adjacent businesses of having a site that's partially constructed, as well as to the townspeople, the inconvenience of having an uneven roadway and having those issues.
I just needed to have that fleshed out by engineers. I appreciate it.
I think it is definitely a concern that if you waited another year, it would have damage.
Thank you.
Just a quick question. Have we actually received the checks from the state for the 850 and the 150 of $1 million? Or is that coming in after the road's completed?
No, it happens pretty quickly. The process that they have, you submit the invoices from the contractor. There's a whole process, but the reimbursement doesn't come that much far. The reimbursement comes fairly quickly right after you submit that. The only thing we're waiting right now is on some retainage, and I've been working with ETNL on how to get those last pieces.
The state funds haven't been received by the town yet.
The only portion of the state funding that hasn't been received is about $26,000, so that's what we're working right now to just finish that out and put that part of the project away.
I may have missed it since I got here late, but are we restricted to all the same rules that we were originally for that original big grant that we have to have sidewalks on both sides of the street? Is that still going to happen? Is that still the plan? Because they were very hodgepodge about what they did when. It was like, there's construction over here, there's construction over there. And so they dug out in front of my place for our sidewalk that never got laid. Now, am I still going to get a sidewalk there, or is that going to be filled back in? Is it going to start? Because I am concerned, especially if it were delayed another year, my tree will die because I've had exposed roots all winter. And I was originally told with that original plan there was going to be no digging at all, and then they dug twice, and then there was never a sidewalk put in anyway. And I'm like, since that money is already spent, are we still restricted to having a sidewalk on both sides of the street when there's really nowhere to go? So, I mean, we're talking about $2 million, give or take, for a third of a mile, and sidewalks don't go anywhere.
I mean, the crucial components are still sound. we are still planning to have sidewalks on both sides of the road. I will say that your particular property, we have, after looking at the report, there are some options there. I do want to connect with you outside of this to talk about the particulars, for sure. But yes, the sidewalks are still proposed.
You had said that the analysis for traffic analysis and everything was, you had asked the previous designer to take a look at all the collected data over the years and provide their opinion on what was the best project to, if their opinion proved so useless, given all the other stuff, why are we trusting their proposal for the traffic analysis and not asking Green Construction to give their opinion on that traffic analysis as well?
It's a good question. I think part of it is the scope of what we're dealing with right now, and whether this gets down to some judgment calls of whether we believe that traffic analysis is fundamentally flawed enough to push this project off another season and not be able to handle the design deficiencies. Like I said, when we look at the other projects that we had, this one was kind of a logical next step in kind of modernizing the approach, taking all the new turning counts, all of the new vehicle traffic counts, and coming up with, frankly, a lot of best practices and different designs that are used on a lot of other roadways. A lot of other complete streets designs are similar to a lot of the components that are proposed on this roadway. So we have not, at least from the planning board's perspective, no one has come forward to us with credible evidence that would suggest that this project is somehow flawed from a traffic standpoint.
And what was done prior were that they looked at various alternatives, including a roundabout, I don't know if people remember that, and a variety of things. And so...
And that was several different firms, not
right. And so really what we ended up with is sort of a selection of using best practices from those. So I don't think there are any elements of the traffic part that was completely off base from things that we had been discussing with these other firms already. But that's...
I have one last question, believe it or not. Snow removal. Okay, how is the drainage going to handle the snow removal? One of the things that worries me is that drain that I talked about in front of the White Pond residents. The town right now is taking a backhoe and they're driving up my driveway and they're dumping snow on top of that drain hole. Is that what the plan was that for? How is the road going to handle the snow meltage?
The inlet analysis that we did and the catch basin spacing we're doing it will handle it the same as most other roads would that you would typically see. As far as the snow being put over onto that other drain, that is, that the snow would block the rainwater from getting into that drain. So that is maybe something that we can kind of consider, and maybe the highway department can also look at is how they plow that area. So
You just eat that as not training. Okay, very good, thank you.
Any other general questions, or if need be, we can touch base with anybody regarding their property here in the next few minutes. But then, it's Thursday. We will be at town meeting on Monday, and we'll be talking about this again. But it's our intention to have a very similar presentation and something to deliver on Monday. We're hoping the big changes were between the last meeting and this one. So I appreciate everybody's time. I know it's been almost 2 hours. So thank you, and then we'll see everyone on Monday, perhaps. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sue.